Ever had a neighbor help themselves to your water? Our protagonist, let's call him Mark, decided enough was enough. He devised the perfect revenge to teach his entitled neighbor, a woman named Carol, a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. This all unfolded in a quiet, well-manicured suburban neighborhood where most folks kept to themselves. Except for Carol. She was a prominent, albeit self-appointed, figure in the local homeowners association, HOA, circles, and she firmly believed the rules were for other people, not her. She was your classic busybody, demanding, condescending, and utterly convinced the world owed her something. The story centers around Mark, a calm, rational homeowner who simply wanted to enjoy his peace and privacy. But when his garden hose kept getting mysteriously moved and his water bills started to climb, he got suspicious. That's when he discovered his next-door neighbor, Carol, had been casually using his hose to water her prize-winning petunias without so much as a "by your leave." When Mark politely confronted her, she just brushed him off with an entitled smirk, claiming, "It's just water, what's the big deal?" But instead of escalating the argument, Mark decided to outsmart her. What followed was a brilliantly petty maneuver that had the whole internet buzzing and left Carol regretting she ever laid a finger on that hose. In this meticulously maintained suburban enclave, governed by a strict HOA, everyone knew the rules. Lawns were neatly trimmed, garbage bins were tucked out of sight, and even the color of mailboxes had to adhere to specific guidelines. It was the kind of place where order and uniformity reigned supreme. At the heart of this carefully curated community was Carol, a woman who had somehow positioned herself as the unofficial enforcer of HOA rules, despite not officially being on the HOA board. She had a loud voice and an even louder sense of entitlement. Everyone knew her, and most tried to steer clear. She would patrol the neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom, reporting minor infractions and nitpicking over the smallest details. The HOA tolerated her because she was relentless and had somehow convinced a few influential members that she had the neighborhood's best interests at heart. But what no one expected was that behind her self-proclaimed badge of righteousness, Carol felt she was above the very rules she loved to impose on others. Mark had moved into the neighborhood a few years prior, preferring a quiet life. A calm, polite person by nature, he kept his yard clean, paid his dues on time, and stayed out of neighborhood drama. But all of that began to change when he noticed something strange. His water bill started creeping up. At first, he thought it might be a leaking pipe or faulty plumbing. He checked everything inside and out, but couldn't find anything amiss. The mystery deepened until one morning, while doing routine yard work, he noticed that his garden hose was not where he had left it. The nozzle was wet, the hose slightly uncoiled. It seemed odd, but he shrugged it off. Maybe he'd forgotten to put it back properly the last time he used it. But then it happened again, and again. Each time, the hose was left in a slightly different position than he remembered. His suspicion grew. So he decided to take action not by confronting anyone immediately, but by installing a small, discreet security camera near the side of his house. What he captured left no room for doubt. Carol, the HOA's self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, was walking into his yard in broad daylight, uncoiling his hose, and watering her own plants across the property line. No attempt at subtlety, no shame, just pure audacity. She acted as if the hose was hers by default, occasionally even dragging it across his flower beds, as if it were an extension of her own backyard. Furious but composed, Mark decided to talk to her. The next day, he walked over, video evidence on his phone, and calmly asked her to stop using his water. He explained that his bills had increased and that it was private property. Carol, in typical fashion, scoffed. "It's just water," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You have plenty, and it's not like you're using it all. Why are you being so stingy? We live in a community. We're supposed to share." She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the trespassing. Instead, she doubled down, implying that he was the unreasonable one for even bringing it up. And then came the clincher. "If you don't want people using your hose, maybe you should lock it up. But until then, I'll use it when I need to. My plants are dying." She turned and walked away like she had won some moral argument. That's when Mark realized logic wouldn't work on Carol. Kindness and reason had failed. She felt entitled to his property, and unless something dramatic happened, she would continue her little water theft operation. So he began to think. He didn't want a physical confrontation or a legal battle. He wanted something simple, effective, and with a touch of poetic justice. That's when the idea hit him. If she insisted on using his hose, then he'd let her. But he'd make sure it gave her exactly what she deserved. He got to work over the weekend. Carefully, discreetly, he rerouted the hose connection. Instead of hooking up to his normal water outlet, it now connected to a large, sealed tank he used for collecting gray water and other yard runoff. Think rainwater mixed with fallen leaves and a bit of soil, nothing hazardous. It wasn't technically sewage. He wasn't about to risk any health violations, but it smelled bad enough and looked unpleasant enough to make a point. He made sure everything was set up in a way that still looked like a normal garden hose setup from the outside. To any unsuspecting neighbor or one who felt entitled enough to use another person's water, it would look like business as usual. Sure enough, the next morning, his camera caught her in action again. Carol marched over in her usual way, yanked the hose across the lawn, and turned the nozzle on full blast onto her flower beds. Only this time, instead of a clean stream of water, she was greeted by a brown, murky liquid that gave off a distinctly swampy odor. It sprayed onto her plants, soaked her shoes, and even splashed back onto her pristine white gardening gloves. Her expression changed almost instantly from smug satisfaction to utter horror. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. A few stepped onto their porches to see what the commotion was. Carol, now splattered with murky water and embarrassment, stormed back to her house, fuming. Later that day, the HOA president came knocking on Mark's door, asking for an explanation. Carol had filed a complaint, claiming that Mark had intentionally sabotaged the neighborhood environment and created an unsafe situation. But when Mark calmly explained the setup and showed the footage of Carol trespassing multiple times without permission, the tables turned. The HOA president was clearly uncomfortable. While Carol was a known nuisance, she had never been caught red-handed like this before. There were no rules that prohibited a resident from connecting their hose to a private gray water tank. And more importantly, the HOA had no jurisdiction over how someone used their own water supply, especially when the person complaining had been caught using it without consent. The police were even called, but once the full story came out, including the video evidence, they politely informed Carol that she was, in fact, trespassing and had no legal grounds for a complaint. In fact, they gently suggested she consider herself lucky that Mark hadn't pressed charges for repeated unauthorized use of his property. Carol didn't take the humiliation well. For weeks, she avoided eye contact with neighbors. She stopped her self-appointed patrols around the neighborhood and seemed to lose her influence in HOA matters. Her yard, once pristine, began to look a bit neglected, possibly out of shame or fear of another encounter. And Mark? He became something of a quiet legend in the community. Though he never bragged, word spread quickly. Neighbors began referring to the incident with amused nicknames like the Great Hose Handoff or Carol's Murky Mistake. One even created a meme that made it to the front page of Reddit's r/entitled people subreddit, where thousands of users cheered him on as a hero of petty justice. What made the whole situation so satisfying wasn't just the revenge, it was the precision and restraint behind it. Mark hadn't yelled, threatened, or caused lasting damage. He had simply turned Carol's entitlement against her, using her own assumptions and arrogance as the tool of her downfall. The internet loved it. Comments poured in, applauding his creativity, patience, and poetic justice. Some suggested awards. Others shared similar stories of entitled neighbors, inspired by his calm, yet savage approach. And from that day forward, no one in the neighborhood ever touched Mark's hose again.